Welcome, fellow beekeepers. This is Jamie Walters, your live webinar training host. I'm pleased to share this educational webinar in hopes to make you a better beekeeper. Live sessions are now recorded on the fourth Sunday of each month at 7 o'clock p.m. through Zoom conference call. You're welcome to reserve a ticket at www.eventbrite.com. Search for Ohio State Beekeepers Association's events and click Tickets. Register by filling in your name and email address, and a confirmation email will be sent to you with a Zoom link. Each training session is recorded and posted on OSBA's YouTube channel. You're welcome to subscribe and be sure to click the bell to be alerted each time we upload a new video. Each month's speaker and presentation will be posted on OSBA's Facebook page and on our website at ohiostatebeekeepers.org. You're welcome to subscribe to the live webinar training news group to be alerted at the beginning of each month. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at live-webinar-training@ohiostatebeekeepers.org. And now on to our previous recorded webinar.
All right, Jamie, thank you. I'll do that certainly momentarily. Hopefully you guys all can hear me, and I thank you for joining me on a Sunday evening. It's really my pleasure to be able to speak to you guys, just to show you that I'm real. I am sitting in my bedroom in a rocking chair beside my bed at the moment. I usually don't share my video while I'm speaking. I'll share my screen, but not my video. That way I'm not pushing too much information. I can make sure my house Wi-Fi doesn't crash on me while I'm speaking to you guys. Again, I'm very much grateful that you guys are joining me tonight. So what I'm going to do, let's see here, share my screen. So now all of you should see my screen, and you should see a Google page. And what I always like to do anytime I start a presentation is I really like to show you how to find some information that my team and I produce, so that by the time this talk is over and you've long since forgotten what I shared, you're at least able to find information related to it. So if you have questions along the way, if you'll type those questions into the chat box, and at the very end of this talk, I'll make sure and take some time to answer some of the questions. All right. So here we are on a Google page. As Jamie mentioned, my name is Jamie Ellis. I work for the University of Florida. So if you just Google University of Florida, and given that I work with honeybees, you can just type in honeybee, University of Florida honeybee, and you press enter. Your very first option is going to be my lab's web page. You can see it there, Honeybee Research and Extension Lab, University of Florida. If you click on that option, like I will do now, you will be taken to my lab's website. A couple things I want to point out before we get into the talk. My team and I do produce a podcast. It is called Two Bees and a Podcast. We've been releasing episodes since early 2020. To our surprise, it's become wildly popular with people from dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of countries all around the world listening to it, thousands upon thousands of beekeepers. And we try to interview beekeepers and bee scientists from all over the world to update people on all the happenings related to bees and beekeeping. We also have a lot of online training events. For example, we have a bee college. Every Saturday morning, the entire month of March, we are offering bee college classes from all types of topics related to bees and beekeeping. So if you're interested in that, you can click there. We also have a Master Beekeeper Program. Lots of states do. One of the benefits of ours is that it is entirely online. You can take this Master Beekeeper Program from anywhere on planet Earth. And we literally do have folks from around the world in this Master Beekeeper Program. It's got 4 levels. In those 4 levels, we have over 200 lectures about bees and beekeeping. Every topic that we could think of, we made a lecture about and loaded it into one of those 4 levels. The 4th level is the only one not online at the moment, but we're recording lectures for it, and it's going to be online by the end of the year. But the good news about it is you have to complete the first 3 levels before you can take that 4th level anyway. So you won't even notice that it's not online. But the point being is that It's a resource that you can do on your smartphone, at your computer, at a tablet, at your house, whatever. It's a internationally available all times of the day and night Master Beekeeper program. So you might check that out if you're interested in those kinds of things. We also have a blog that you can subscribe to, and then I'll tell you some things at the end of my lecture, additional ways that you can find information and resources about that my team and I are able to produce. Before I go any further, though, I want to scroll down on my webpage, and you'll see one button that says Beekeeper Resources. If you click on Beekeeper Resources, everything that my team and I produce, we categorize it and put it under one of these topics. For example, if I were here tonight giving you a talk about some aspect of honeybee biology, if you clicked on honeybee biology, you would see all the documents or videos or whatever that my team and I have produced about different aspects of honeybee biology. The same is true if you were worried about a pest or a disease. For example, if you were worried about Varroa, things that we've produced or things that we really, really like that was produced by others, we will put under that tab. So for example, if I click on Varroa, you'll see some things we've done as well as things we really like. For example, the tools for Varroa Management Honeybee Health Coalition. So the reason I'm telling you this is I just wanted to show you our website, show you that you can access our podcast, our Master Beekeeper program, virtual training events, documents, videos, all kinds of information just from the click of a few buttons, again, on our website. So I invite you to look for that. Again, if you're just joining us, it's super easy to find. You just go to your Google search engine, you type University of Florida honeybee. Even if you misspell it and press enter, you will still be able to find it. So there it is. All right, so I'm going to minimize that, and I am going to pull up a presentation. Tonight, I am giving you some talks, or a talk, on identifying queen events, how to recognize when you have queen issues and what to do about them. So let's spend a little bit of time thinking about that. So as shared earlier, my name is Jamie Ellis. I work for the University of Florida. I work specifically in the Entomology and Nematology department. I am told that we have the largest entomology department in the country. There's about 70 professors in our department, 70, and I am one. So I work specifically with honeybees, and my colleagues work with all kinds of other insects. So it's my pleasure to be joining you tonight from UF. All right, so why have a talk on queens at all? Why have a talk on queens at all? With all the other pressing issues that are going on with bees, why spend any time at all talking about queens? Well, it's real simple. If you look at the Bee Informed Partnership, probably all of you are pretty familiar with the Bee Informed Partnership. If you look at their website and comb through the yearly loss reports, those are the reports that tell you what our loss rates are. If you look at those yearly loss reports, they also poll beekeepers, they survey beekeepers, and they ask those beekeepers, what is most responsible for the death of your colonies? Every year they have been doing that. Every year without exception, beekeepers have reported queen quality as a top 5 stressor of honeybee colonies. In my opinion, the 3 biggest stressors that beekeepers note, queen quality, Varroa, and nutrition. Tonight, I'm talking about one of those. How to identify when your colonies have queen issues and what to do to remedy those queen issues. So by the time this talk is over, I want you to be able to recognize the stressors of honeybees that's related to queens, and I want you to be able to classify the threat level of these stressors as low, moderate, or significant. And then about midway through this presentation, I'm going to tell you how to remedy those stressors related to queen issues, and we'll have some objectives specific to that. All right, let's get going. The way that I give this talk is the first half of the talk, I tell you things that can go wrong with your queen. The second half is how to remedy that. So in this first half, as I share with you things that I believe are issues with queens, I'm going to classify those things as low, moderate, or significant threats. In my opinion, a low threat is one that can lead to the death of your colony, but usually doesn't. A moderate threat or a moderate stressor is one that is common usually. In other words, you'll see it with regularity, and it can cause damage if not addressed appropriately. And a significant threat is one that is widespread. In other words, it happens with regularity, and it will kill colonies if you don't do something about it quickly. So as I go through the stresses related to queen quality, I'll tell you if it's a really big deal or if it's something that you can try to address, in the coming weeks or months. So let's think about all of these things. In my opinion, there's about 6 or 8 things that can go wrong with queens or that are related to queens. One of those is you could have limited access to them. We'll talk about that coming up. She can be dead or missing. She could be poor quality or failing. There could be laying workers. They could be in the process of superseding. You could have multiple queens. You could have colonies that swarm, and you could have bees that have become Africanized honeybee colonies. So I'm going to talk in great detail about all of them, except when colonies become Africanized, because I was looking at the participant list and seeing where you guys are from, and many of you, nay, most of you are outside of the African bee distribution. So I'm going to focus on these other stressors one by one. So let's pick the first one, and you'll kind of get an idea of how I'm going to do this. All right, limited access to queens and bees. Again, think about this presentation in context of what can go wrong related to queens. And there can be things that go wrong related to queens outside of your colony. For example, let's say you have a queen issue, but you cannot get a new queen. Maybe it's the wrong time of year. Maybe you have a queen issue in December or January or February, and there's nothing you can do about it. Perhaps it's spring and you have a queen issue, and there's no way for you to purchase one because everybody else is in line to get a queen. And maybe you don't have any queen producers in your area, and on and on and on. Having limited access to queens can really hinder your ability to address other stresses related to queens. The reason this is important is because when I get to the end of this presentation, I'm going to strongly endorse one method of addressing most of your queen problems. And if you follow that particular method, limited access to queens will never be a problem for you. So stay tuned. You have to stay tuned the whole talk to get that snippet at the end. All right. The second stressor related to queens is your queen could be dead or missing. I mean, that's the obvious one, right? What's the most significant queen event that you can have in your colony? Well, she could just be dead. You can go in and not find her. There's no eggs. There's no young larvae. You see queen cells everywhere. This is a common threat. It affects nearly every colony at least once every 2 years. In fact, I would argue that the average colony loses its queen in 6 to 10 months. So the vast majority of your colonies are going to be queenless at some point during the year. Failure to address this and your colony can die. We're going to talk about addressing it coming up, but it's important to be able to recognize when your colonies are queenless. And this is probably the easiest one that most of you are able to recognize. You either don't see her or you don't see eggs or young larvae or brood, etc. Now I'm going to pause for just a moment because of all the queen stressors or all the queen related stress issues that bother me most. This is the one that bothers me most. And that's poor quality or failing queen. Remember, in the BIP surveys, beekeepers list as one of their top stressors, poor quality queens. Now I need to hop on a soapbox for just a second. I've been keeping bees for 31 years. And when I was a young beekeeper, and if my colony had a queen at all, it didn't matter if she was laying 1 egg a week. I was so happy that she was present that I did nothing to address it. And in my opinion has changed drastically about this idea. In my opinion, it is our duty and responsibility as beekeepers to make sure our colonies are led by good queens. In my opinion, It is our duty as beekeepers to make sure that they are of high quality and not failing. And this is important because a lot of us will allow mediocrity to exist in our honeybee colonies, and that can only lead to stress in your colony. And the reason we permit it to happen is because, again, we're so happy that they have a queen at all that we're like, well, she's not that bad. But in reality, a failing queen can be as bad as a colony as Varroa is. What are some indications? What is a poor or failing queen? How does she appear? Well, she can be a drone layer. That could suggest that she mated improperly or ran out of semen altogether. She can be inbred, which leads to the production of spotty brood patterns like what you see in this image on the left. She could be maimed or injured. She could have gotten too old and no longer maintain her egg output at acceptable levels. Maybe she's passing on undesirable traits to her offspring, leading to an unproductive colony. As beekeepers, we have to be able to recognize these issues, the issue of poor quality or failing queen, and we have to take steps to remedy it. And as much as it hurts my heart to say it and your ears to hear it, that means we have to take the step to do away with this queen and requeen the colony. A lot of people will argue with me on this point, right? But I would argue that allowing a poor queen to lead a colony jeopardizes the entire colony, not just their productivity. So we have to be able to recognize that, all of these things are suggestive that she's failing or of poor quality. Let's continue on. Another queen-related stress, laying workers. Biology is not perfect. Sometimes colonies go queenless and they fail to requeen themselves successfully. When that happens, some of the workers in the hive their ovaries can develop and they can begin to lay eggs. And we call this condition laying workers. All of you are aware of this. And the reason we have this image up here is because laying workers, one of the telltale signs that a colony is led by laying workers, is you will see multiple eggs per cell, right? Some of these cells have 6 or 8 eggs. If this happens right after a queenless event, there's a reasonable chance it's laying workers. Laying worker colonies are remarkably difficult to requeen because not only do those workers begin to lay eggs, but they also take on the pheromonal bouquet of a queen. The colony thinks they have a queen. So you will feed it queen after queen after queen after queen, only for the colony to kill that queen because they think they already have one. Do not worry, there is a way to remedy laying worker colonies, and I will share that with you towards the end of this presentation. Incidentally, it's my favorite way of addressing all queen problems. So again, you have to stay tuned and see what that is. All right, Seizure. One of my favorite things about being a beekeeper is that it's almost like you're a veterinarian of bees. In fact, I would go a step further. It's almost like you're the Sherlock Holmes of bees. You have to look at the nest entrance. You have to pull out a few combs. You have to look at the bees and the brood pattern. And now you have to deduce what's happening to that hive. Is the colony in it okay? Are they productive? So there's lots of things that you can read about that colony. Some of the best beekeepers on planet Earth are those who can look at a colony and read the signals that the bees are giving you. And one of those signals related to queen stress is supersedure. Supersedure is the efforts of the worker bees to replace their queen. They are superseding her. Usually, this happens when the queen is failing or maimed, or one of the things that I showed you on the previous slide. And in those instances, the workers can detect the problem and they begin the process of replacing her. That is planned supersedure. There is also emergency supersedure, which is when your queen is dead or missing and they begin making a queen in an emergency situation. Now, I'm going to speak in a generality here, which is always dangerous because there's always exceptions to the rule. But in general, this is a generalization. In general, queen cells built on the perimeter of the comb tend to be in support of swarms. In general, queen cells built on the face of the comb tend to be in support of supersedure. So anytime I start seeing queen cells in the middle of a comb or right on the edge of a brood pattern, I think to myself, do I have a queen? And I will think to myself, do I have a queen? And if I do the bees detect a problem with her? So anytime I see queen cells that I believe to be supersedure cells, I will go a little bit further to see if my queen is maimed, laying enough eggs, if she's laying eggs at all, if she's only producing brood, or even if she's present or not present. So supersedure cells are important cells to be able to recognize. Next, multiple queens. Hopefully you guys have spotted that this image shows 2 queens. Now, I did my PhD in South Africa, and part of what I did when I lived in South Africa is I worked with observation hives every day, 3 times a day. I would watch them in the morning, I'd watch them in the afternoon, and then I'd watch them at night for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And one of the things that I discovered when I lived in South Africa, it was very common for me to see colonies have 2 queens. I was watching them all the time, and so I was regularly seeing colonies with 2 queens. So when I come back home to the States, I would work colonies and I'd see a queen on one frame and I'd put that frame back in the hive and I'd go 3 or 4 frames downstream, pick up that frame, and gosh, I found another queen. Man, she ran over here quickly. Well, I started paying attention to that and discovering that a reasonable number of our colonies actually have 2 queens. I would guess it's around the 10% range. I've never seen a study on it. That's just my guess, so don't hold me to it. But the only time I tend to find colonies with 2 queens is when I pull a frame and I see her on one side, and then I flip that frame and see a queen over there, and I'm like, man, she ran around over here quickly. And then I flip it back and see a queen, and then I flip it back and see a queen, and then it dawns on me, holy moly, there's 2 queens in this hive. So this can be an issue because in theory, they can fight to the death. Usually what I see happen in this scenario, though, is over the next couple of weeks, one of these 2 queens disappears and the other becomes the reigning matriarch. So I consider this a low threat. Swarming. Now, if there's 252 people on this talk and one of those individuals is me, that means there's 251 of you. That means there's 251 opinions related to how important swarming is or swarm control is to you and your beekeeping operation. I'm going to just make this statement as clear as possible. In my opinion, swarming significantly impacts your ability to produce lots of honey. So why do I say that? A little bit about biology. Look at that swarm in that picture. That cluster has nothing. They have no wax, they have no pollen, they have no brood, they have no nest. They only have themselves and their stomachs full of honey. And from this cluster, they have to move into a tree cavity, build wax, fill it with honey and pollen, and the queen has to produce lots of brood, and they have to store enough honey in this new nest site to survive the winter that's coming up. So as a result, honeybees are biologically programmed to swarm in the weeks leading up to the major nectar flow and during the first half of the major nectar flow. Now, I've already told you biology is messy. So that means you can get swarms late in the year, swarms early in the year, but the vast majority of swarms happen in the weeks leading up to the major nectar flow and during the first half of the major nectar flow. And the reason for that is simple. That's when that new colony has the most resources available to it to move into a new cavity, build lots of comb, and store 75 to 100 pounds of honey before the winter comes that's 4 months away. As a result, most colonies will try to swarm when you least need them to. Now I want you to do some math with me, and I'm going to round everything off to the nearest week. So when a colony swarms, they have queen cells left behind that are about a week old. Again, I'm rounding everything off, so don't punish me if I'm a day or two off, but they're about a week old. So it takes about a week before that new queen emerges. So if you're keeping up with me, 1 week until the new queen emerges. It's 2 weeks until she mates and lays her first egg. It's 3 weeks before that egg undergoes all of its developmental stages and emerges as an adult worker. So let's do that again quickly. 1 week until she emerges, 2 weeks until she finishes mating, 3 weeks before her first egg becomes an adult. If you're putting your fingers up when I say that, that's 6. That means when your colony swarms, you lose 6 weeks of brood production, not to mention half of the bees. So it takes 6 weeks before that new queen can benefit your colony. And by then, it's usually too late. Your honey flow is over. So swarming, in my opinion, is a queen event. So let's go through all these and think about it. Limited access to queens, I consider a moderate threat. Dead or missing queen, a significant threat. You need to do something about it. Poor quality queens, queen failure, a significant threat. Laying workers, a significant threat. Seizure, a moderate threat. Multiple queens, I consider a low threat. Swarming, I consider a low threat. But all of these things can pop up randomly throughout the year, and you as a beekeeper have to be ready to respond to those threats. So hopefully now that we're just over halfway with the talk, you can now recognize the stressors of honeybees that are related to queens and classify those threat levels as low, moderate, or significant. Now let me switch over to a second talk where I talk about what do you do now that you have recognized that you have queen issues. I want you to be able to identify pros and cons of various requeening methods. I'm going to skip this first one. It's not really part of the talk. And then I want you to be able to order the steps of requeening with a caged queen and using a nuke. So I've shown you what the stressors are. Now let's spend a little bit of time addressing how to fix queen related problems. So let's get down to that. Basically, the way you fix a queen problem is to requeen your colony. And I know you're going, I cannot believe I signed on to hear such stupid advice. But the truth is, when you have a queen problem, you've got to requeen that colony. And there's a handful of ways to do it. And my absolute favorite way is the last way. So please stay on till the end, because that's the most important piece of advice that I'm going to give you this whole talk. So what are the ways that you can fix your queen problems? You can allow a colony to requeen itself. You can insert a ripe queen cell and then allow that colony to requeen. You can introduce an adult queen, or you can requeen using a nuke. So let's think about this. About half of the queen stressors that I told you, the queen was actually present. About half of the stressors I told you, the queen was absent. So if they swarmed, she's absent. If she's dead, she's absent. If there's laying workers, she's absent. On the other hand, if she's failing, she's present. If she's become a drone layer, she's present. If her egg output is not up to par, she's present. If she's maimed, she's present. So about half of the queen stressors that you're going to encounter require you to dequeen the colony. She's present, she's no good, you need to get rid of her. So you dequeen the colonies. Generally speaking, colonies should be dequeened before you try to engage in a requeen. All right, so if she has a queen, you must remove her. All right, I would suggest you euthanize her as quickly as possible. Usually if she's a problem, you don't want to put her in another colony because she'll potentially carry that problem with her. So dequeen is step one. Now let's talk specifically about the 4 ways of requeening. Many of you know these ways, but hopefully I can give you some tidbits of information. Way number one, you can't allow the colony simply to requeen itself. I've kept bees for 31 years. You've heard me say that twice. This is probably the way I do it most, not because I am cheap, although I am cheap. This is the free method, but because I have very little time in my life. And usually when I spot a colony that's queenless, I'm like, well, biology usually wins, so I'm going to let them requeen themselves. So that's just where you allow the colony to requeen itself. So in all of these scenarios, swarming, dead colony or dead queen, maimed queen, etc., you dequeen the colony, you've created a queenless colony. If there are eggs and young larvae, the colony will try to requeen itself. The downside is that this is not a perfect system. Colonies with some regularity fail to requeen themselves for whatever reason. Maybe there was a black queen cell virus in the hive and the queens never matured fully before the developing queen died. Perhaps the queen was eaten by a bird on her mating flight. Believe it or not, this is more common than you might know. So colonies can fail to requeen themselves. So even if you choose option one, you need to watch them closely, hold their hand through the process so that 2 to 3 weeks later, you have a emerged, mated, and laying queen. So this is good. The benefit of this is it's cheap. Because it costs you nothing. At least you don't have to purchase a queen. The downside is it can fail. Let me give you some pointers related to it. And these are generalizations, again, so that doesn't mean they're universally true. It's just a generalization. In general, the larger the queen cell, the better the developing queen was attended while she was young. So if my colonies are ever queenless and I want to allow them to requeen themselves, I will go through those colonies and remove all queen cells except the largest two. When I was younger, I would only leave the largest one, but I've seen enough queen cells bad that I don't want to leave all of my eggs in one basket, so to speak. So I will leave the largest two queen cells and I do my best to keep them on the same frame if possible. That way, when one queen emerges, she doesn't have to look very far or hard to kill her competition. I don't want them emerging at the same time on opposite ends of the hive because one of those queens could lead a swarm or the two queens could fight to the death. I really want one to be the first one to emerge to find her sister. In this image here, you see a great example of that. On the left, the queen emerged normally. I know that because the cell is open at the tip. And then she went and bit a hole in the cell beside her, stuck her abdomen in, and killed her developing sister. How can I tell that? Because the queen cell was once all the way down to the capping. This is the capping of the second queen cell, but it's all missing because this queen killed her. So this is a low cost. It's free. There are some drawbacks, right? You walked through the math with me earlier. It takes 3 to 6 weeks for that ripe queen cell to emerge, mate, and lay an egg. Furthermore, it's a possibility that she won't be mated well if it's early in the season or late in the season. So it's also risky in certain times of the year. If they're in October and there are no drones available, you can't allow this to happen. So it's a reasonable way, but not a perfect way. All right. Way number 2. You can requeen with a ripe queen cell. The only difference between this method and way number 1 is way number 1, you're allowing the bees to do it themselves. Way number 2, you can purchase ripe queen cells from queen breeders and they will send you queen cells, just like what you're seeing here. Usually, though, they're not going to sell them to hobbyists at small numbers, but it is very common for commercial beekeepers to buy hundreds or thousands of queen cells because it is cheaper to purchase a queen cell than it is to purchase a fully mated queen. And what they'll do is they'll purchase a queen cell and they'll throw a queen cell in that colony. You can either produce them yourself or you can purchase them from a supplier. Like I said, a lot of people will purchase them from suppliers. Some people get worried that if you put a foreign queen cell into a colony or a hive, that colony, not recognizing it as its own, will kill it. So you can actually purchase queen cell protectors like what you see numbered 2, slide it over the queen cell, and those 2 prongs can be pushed into the frame, and that cell is protected, allowing the cell to not be chewed or destroyed by the workers while that queen continues to develop. The benefit of this is you're paying less for a queen cell, you're bringing in some genetic diversity, but the drawback with it is similar to the drawback with allowing colonies to requeen themselves, is that it takes time. Furthermore, it's not often available for hobbyists and sideliners. Usually you would have to buy queen cells in bulk. So there are some potential drawbacks. Probably the most common way that beekeepers deal with queen issues is they will purchase and introduce an adult queen into a hive using queen cages. There are lots of different styles of queen cages. You see one of those queen cage styles here. There are a couple of pointers that I'd like to give you related to this. Usually, though not always, queens will be accompanied in their cages by attendant worker bees. The idea is that these workers will take care of her en route to you. But research has shown that colonies will more readily accept queens that are alone in the cage than queens that are accompanied by workers. So some people, knowing this, as soon as they get that queen cage, will release the workers and try to keep the queen in the cage, and then they'll put that cage into the hive so that she is by herself to increase the chances that she will be released and accepted. All right, there's a few other tricks that I will give you. These queen cages all usually have candy in front of some sort of opening. You can see it arrowed in number 3 here. The idea is that as the bees from the colony chew through that candy, they will become accustomed to the queen in that cage through the mesh, so that by the time they make it all the way through the candy and release the queen, they will have accepted her. So clearly, if you are using this method to requeen your colony, you do not want anything to obstruct the entrance to that queen cage so that the bees can actually access the candy. I've seen some people put in queen cages and hives in a way that the candy can't even be accessed, so the queen is never released. I've also seen people use queen cages like number 1 and number 3, and they will insert those into a hive in such a way that the screen side of the cage is up against the face of the comb, making it impossible for the bees from the hive to access the queen directly. So you always want the screen of these wooden cages to run perpendicular to the frame, not facing the frame, but perpendicular so the bees can access the screen. And you always want the candy end pointing up. Remember, that's the end that the queen has to get out of. If you point it down and leave workers in that cage, if the workers die, they can fall and block the escape hole so that by the time the workers in the colony chew through the candy, there's still no way for the queen to get out. So you always want to face the candy end up, screen side perpendicular to the face of the comb. I'll tell you one more point of advice, and this is just something I do. I tend to not allow bees to release the queen themselves at all. I tend to put the cage in and then go back 4 days later and manually release the queen. If you take the cage out of a colony that it's been living in for 4 days, there will be bees on these cages. You can look at how the bees are reacting to the queen in those cages and get a general sense of if they've accepted her or not. If they are running freely on the face of the cage, if you can use your finger or hive tool to brush the bees easily on the screen, then they likely have accepted her, and you can release her directly into the hive and see how the bees respond. If though they are biting ferociously at the screen and you try to use your finger to move them out of the way and they won't move, they are trying to bite into that cage to kill the queen. If you release her in that instance, they're going to ball her instantly. The good news is, though, you can grab her, throw her back in the cage, put her back in the colony, and try again later. Now, I've just told you about 3 of the 4 ways, but my favorite way of addressing queen problems is way number 4, requeening with a nuke. This way addresses every stressor I showed you in the first half of this presentation. This is the only way with near 100% reliability I can requeen laying worker colonies. It is the only way that I can instantly fix a hive that swarmed. It is the only way that I can solve problems super quickly in a manner as if the problem never existed at all. And so how does this work? I like to tell hobbyists, for every 2 production colonies that you have, you manage 1 nuke. And then I usually scale that back. If you have an apiary of about 30 production colonies, I would recommend about 5 to 8 nukes. Why a nuke? Because you can requeen colonies using nukes. And I've developed a schematic to help you think about this. Now, the good news is, those of you who are ferociously scrambling to take notes, I'm going to show you at the end of this presentation how to find a document that I wrote that explains everything that I'm about to tell you, even better than I have time to tell you now. So it's more important to pay attention. And then at the very end, again, I'll show you how to find the document that has the same schematic. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that this big square is your colony that has the problem. They're queenless. She's failing. They've swarmed. It's laying workers. Whatever queen problem you want, it has. Now let's say you've got this nucleus colony right here beside it. So let's think about this critically. If your colony is queenless, you probably have honey and pollen on the outside frames. You probably have some old brood and empty comb scattered amongst some old brood that have queen cells on those frames. Think about it. If it's queenless, there's no eggs and young larvae. All you've got is old brood and maybe the remnants of some queen cells. So I just kind of randomly assigned honey, pollen, old brood, empty comb, old brood, empty comb, a couple of frames with queen cells, some frames of old brood, honey, and pollen. If you've got a nuke, you've got a fully functioning colony, honey, pollen on the outside, some brood, a laying queen, bees, etc. What I would do is go into that hive that has the queen problem, and I would remove 5 frames. In this case, I took out a honey and pollen frame. It was here. I took out the 2 frames that had queen cells. So that's 3 frames. So honey and pollen, 2 frames with queen cells. That's 3. And then I take out 2 frames of old brood, empty comb. So that's 5 frames. I take those 5 frames out, sit them beside the hive, and now I have a full-size hive with 5 frames missing. Step 3, I push all of those frames up against one side of the hive. All of the remaining frames I press up against one side of the hive. Step number 4, I take all the frames, bees, brood, queen, frames, everything. I take everything out of that nuke and place it in that empty spot that I've just created in my full-size hive. So now you've got this. You've got 5 frames from the old hive, 5 frames from the nuke, queen and all. Then I take those 5 frames that I'd put outside of my hive, I put those into the nuke box. I put the lids back on both, and I go home happy. What I've just done is I've used a nuke to requeen my full-size production colony, and I moved some frames from my production colony into a nuke, And now I've got a nuke that is queenless that I allow to requeen itself, or I purchase a new queen or whatever. But my production colony never missed a beat. If it swarmed, I instantly gave it back bees. If the queen was maimed, I instantly requeened it with a new queen. If it was low on bees and brood, I instantly fixed that. This is the only way that when I've used this on laying worker colonies, it always works. So there's 1,000 questions you guys want to ask about this, I am sure. For example, don't the bees from the hive just go and kill the queen? I have done this hundreds of times and never lost a single queen this way. However, people get nervous and don't believe me. So, what I encourage them to do, if you believe or are worried about putting that free running nuke queen with her frames into the production colony, then you can just find her, cage her, leave her caged in this full size hive, and then come back 3 to 5 days later and release her. Do the bees fight? I've never had the bees fight, or at least only incredibly minimal fighting. So the long story short is the benefit of using this way to solve your queen problems is it instantly replaces the queen, but it also solves the problem that your colony was having because it had a bad queen or a missing queen, which is we've got no brood. We have no bees being born, and on and on and on. By putting that nuke in there, you've given it brood, you've given it bees, and you've given it a good queen. So if you've paid attention, then I hope so. I know I can get boring. You've now identified the pros and cons of the various requeening methods, and you should be able to order the steps of requeening with a cage queen and using a nuke. What I want to do quickly is show you how to find that document, and then I'm going to go to a contact slide and try to answer some of your questions. So if you go back to Google, the University of Florida requires us to write fact sheets. And the University of Florida fact sheet is called the EDIS document. That's EDIS. So if you Google EDIS, Nuke, honeybee, EDIS, Nuke, honeybee, and press enter, your very first option is that document to which I referred you. If you click on it, it will tell you using the same images that I just showed you, step by step, how to requeen colonies using nukes and the benefits of using nukes to requeen colonies. You can even download this document as a PDF right here. So you can download it and email it out to your beekeepers in your club. So what I want to do is go back to the presentation. I want to show this last slide. And what I want to invite you guys to do is if you have any questions that I'm unable to address outside or during this time here, you can find my lab at UF Honeybee Lab. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at UF Honeybee Lab. Here's my website. Here's my email address. You can screenshot this slide. You can take a picture of it with your phone. I strongly encourage you to at least follow us at UF Honeybee Lab so that you can find out what we're doing. You can ask questions to us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and I will even answer a lot of those questions through our podcast, Two Bees in a Podcast. So I'm going to leave this slide up for about 10 more seconds, and then I'm going to take it down so that I can share my video, see you, you see me, and we try to spend the next 5 or 10 minutes maybe with some question and answer time. So about 5 more seconds for you guys to take pictures or screenshots of this slide here. All righty, I'm going to stop sharing, and before I go into the Q&A, I just want to thank you for joining me. It's been my pleasure to be able to speak to you. Jamie, I believe there's probably some questions in the chat box. I'm going to turn my video on. and I'm going to spend the next 10 or 15 minutes saying, I don't know a lot, because I'm sure you guys are asking some difficult questions. All right. So let's get started. I'm sorry I'm wearing a weird shirt too. I work in youth ministry at my church. And right before I joined you tonight, I had taken my youth group to play laser tag. So I'm dressed like a youth leader and not like a professor tonight, I'm afraid. So I hope that's okay.
You're fine.
All right.
Rascal's Apiary has a question. Is it possible to cage each queen in your apiary prior to the swarm season, wait 4 hours, and just rotate the queens to other hives in the apiary to avoid swarming of the hives during the swarm season?
So that's an interesting question. I actually write the question and answer series for the American Bee Journal. And I had that same question posed to me recently with the American Bee Journal. And so then I looked up research on this topic and have never seen any research projects on that question. So the short answer is I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. But now let me tell you some gut feelings. There are times where switching queens helps out during swarm season. And let me give you that example. I happen to clip my queens. So my colonies cannot ever successfully swarm unless they swarm with a virgin queen. But when I clip my queens, they will still try to swarm, and they'll land on the ground. They'll go back into the hive and they'll try again, and they'll land on the ground and go back into the hive and try again. When a colony has tried to swarm, if you capture that swarm and put it back into its original hive, it is going to try again. It's going to try again. Once they have tried, they will not stop trying. So when I have had colonies swarm and I would capture a swarm, rather than put it back into the same hive and try not to lose the bees, I will find a queen in the swarm, find a queen in the neighboring colony, cage them both, and swap them, and go back 4 days later and release them. And that's one way that I will capture my swarm, put them back in the hive, swap queens, and keep that hive from trying to swarm again. So I don't know if it's a good general swarm management practice, but I do know it is a good tool or trick of the trade to use once a swarm has happened and you've captured it and you want to put it back in the same hive. The only real easy way to do that is to swap queens.
All right. Laura Johnson. How long does a colony need to be queenless before introducing a nuke or another queen?
Yeah, so the short answer to that question is, in my opinion, it does not matter. I think research has shown it's best if it's a day or two, but I just don't have time in my life to dequeen it today and come back in a day or two, which incidentally is why I don't allow colonies to release the queen themselves. I will dequeen it, put in a caged queen, and then I will come back 4 days later to determine if she's been accepted. But if you do have the time, it's better to leave them queenless for a period of 24 hours. Just be mindful, any period of queenlessness, and the bees are going to try to make queen cells. And so it is important that you remove the queen cells from the hive before you give them a queen, because once they start building queen cells, they might very well opt for the one they're making and not the one you purchased. So it's ideal to leave them queenless for a day or two. If you don't, and I don't, and most commercial beekeepers don't, because we don't have time for that, we will dequeen them, put a new queen in, cut out all the queen cells, and in my case, I go back and manually release her. But in the case of a lot of commercial beekeepers, they just requeen instantly and let whatever happens happen.
All right. Corey Nicholson. Can you spray them with sugar water to limit the fighting when adding the nuke to the requeen?
I love that question because it implies that you've read a lot of books about beekeeping.
Yep.
and what I'm going to say here is, when I was a new beekeeper, I sprayed with sugar water when I combined hives. I put sheets of newspaper between boxes when I was combining hives. And when I started working with commercial beekeepers, I realized they don't have time for that stuff. And I realized that commercial beekeepers combine hives willy-nilly and don't care. And when I looked at their success rate, I came to the conclusion spraying bees with sugar water and combining hives with sheets of newspaper aren't worth the time. So no, I do not spray with sugar water or combine with newspaper. I slam everybody together and go about my business. The good news is, if you are worried, spraying with sugar water won't hurt the situation. So I realize how difficult it is to be comfortable following the requeening with Nukes method, because you're like, everything is wrong. You're throwing a nuke unprotected into a full-size hive. You're throwing a queen unprotected into a colony that's not her own. And if you're worried about that, I've given you permission. Cage that queen, spray with sugar water. But it's, in my opinion, of no consequence, and I just slam them together and move on.
And I wasn't laughing at you with you. I was laughing with you because I do the same thing. When I build my nukes, I take them from different colonies, slam them all together, let them work it out in the end.
Exactly. And I tell you, and I always was worried about widespread death, and I just don't see it. And working with commercial beekeepers taught me that. I mean, they don't have enough newspaper to keep up with the amount of combining that they have to do. So it's just not worth it. And sugar water's sticky. Oh my gosh. I used to spray with sugar water and everything gets sticky.
All right. Sarah, when requeening with a nuke, you place the honey and pollen frames into the center rather than each side of the brood frames. Could you explain why that is your preference or preferred order?
Yeah, I'll do that. So I will tell you, it's not necessary. It's that little piece of Jamie still worried about the fact that I'm combining two foreign colonies. And if there's brood from the nuke right in the middle, the queen might go that way. And I just don't want them to mix that fast. So putting that honey and pollen frame kind of in the center when I'm combining is just my way of kind of forcing a slightly slower mix. It's just me being paranoid. It's my version of spraying the sugar water. So it's not necessary. You could put honey and pollen on the outside and throw them all together, but it's just kind of my way of forcing a slightly slower mix.
All right. And I want to thank everybody. There's more questions, but there's like 13 or 14. And I just want to throw in a poll real quick from OSBA. And I want to add in Christina. This is one of the best presentations I've joined to date. Thank you for sharing. So you knocked one out of the park on this one. And I'm kind of scrolling down. Okay. From Jake, what do you do with the old nuke box and the old colony frames?
So I leave that nuke in the same, I'm telling you, I'm a lazy person. I leave that nuke in the same apiary and allow it to go through the requeening process itself, which I know brings a lot of questions. You know, if I put bees in that nuke, aren't they just going to fly back to their parent hive? Well, that's true too. If you put a nuke in a parent hive, aren't they going to fly back to the nuke? And at the end of the day, it all comes out in the wash. If you're really nervous, like if you only have a colony or two in your apiary, I'd be a little worried about inbreeding of that new queen coming out of that nuke. And that's the beauty of nukes, is if you've got a beekeeper buddy, and I'm looking at 253 beekeeper buddies, you guys could move your nuke to another beekeeper's yard just long enough for that queen to mate. And the moment she's mated in that nuke 2 weeks later, you can bring it back to your apiary. But I don't usually do that. I'll put those frames in the nuke. I'll remove all but the two largest queen cells in that nuke, and I'll leave the nuke in the apiary and allow it to requeen itself.
All right. One from Dave. Can you give me your thoughts on queen caging to break the brood cycle of Varroa control and treatment?
Yeah, I can. Couple things. It's very common in some places in Europe, Italy, as an example. A lot of commercial beekeepers in Italy will actually cage their queen for 28 days in the middle of summer, and that brood break they'll treat with oxalic acid. And both of those things really help them for mite control. A former Ph.D. student of mine, Dr. Cameron Jack, who's now a faculty member here at UF, he did a study during his Ph.D. days looking at brood breaks. And in Florida, where it's hot all the time, it wasn't worth it. It's just too traumatic for colonies. Caging the queen was traumatic for her. The brood break was bad. It just wasn't worth it for us in our setting in Florida. So it certainly seems to be a possible control that works for some folks in some regions of the world and under certain circumstances, but it's a little management heavy. And I think there's probably better ways to control Varroa at the end of the day for most operations.
All right. And Dwight has one. You said your slide mentioned moving the nuke, but you didn't talk about it. None of us have multiple apiaries. Any recommendation on doing this without moving two or three colonies or moving the colonies 2 to 3 miles away?
Yeah. So just what I said earlier, I don't even move nukes out of my apiary. If you're worried about it, you can, but I will say there will obviously be a propensity of the bees in that nuke to fly back to its original nest site. So let's just say for sake of argument that you have two strong colonies in a nuke and you just use that nuke to requeen one of those colonies. I would go into the other colony and get some frames of brood that's emerging and put into that nuke. So if the nuke loses some adult bees drifting back to their original nest site, you've got that population being replaced quickly. So sometimes when I make that nuke, I will make it overly strong in anticipation of losing some bees back and drift. But as I shared earlier, I don't even take my nukes out of the apiary. I just make them, leave them, and go on about my business.
Jeff's got a good question, and I hear this a lot as an inspector also. Does the requeening with a nuke method work for a laying worker colony?
Yes, it does. In fact, it's the
Yeah.
only way that I've been able to requeen laying worker colonies with regularity. I tell you, if you don't use this method for any other reason, I like doing it for requeening laying worker colonies. And I don't know what the biological trigger is, but I'm assuming when you're dumping a lot of bees and a lot of brood and a laying queen all from the same colony together into a colony that's got a laying worker, a switch is flipped and you no longer have a laying worker problem. The other thing I like to use nukes for is when you lose a swarm. Let's face it, we all lose swarms. And when your colony loses a swarm, you're really in trouble because that honey flow is there. You got nothing. So when you use a nuke to requeen a colony that swarmed, you instantly gave it back its bees. You instantly gave it back its brood. And my motto is I let the nukes have problems, not my production colonies.
From Susan, have you ever used the push-in 3-inch by 3-inch screen push-in cages for introducing queens so the queen lays eggs and is more accepted?
I have done that, but it's just not something I do with regularity. But I'm very aware of it and have done it. I usually just use a nuke or an adult queen in a cage.
All right. There's a little to do thinking.
And incidentally, if you
Tons of,
guys have more questions after this, don't hesitate to email me or put them on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. And they'll either at the end of our podcast, I always answer questions from the audience, and the ABJ, I answer questions. So there's lots of ways to get back with me if you have questions.
And there's one for myself for Doug. Is OSBA going to keep doing the Zooms after the pandemic? Absolutely. But this is what I want you guys to do. If this is something you want to keep hearing, you're getting some education from it, talk and send an email to the executive board, the president, vice president, secretary, or treasurer of OSBA, and let them know what your thoughts are. That if this is reaching out to people, if this is getting you good education, that you can sit at the home and you can learn some things, let them know. The OSBA membership, when you turn on pay for that membership, it helps support these type of programs. So from you, we want to hear from you to keep this going. There's one in here, Jamie, and I know you're in Florida, and you're a well-rounded gentleman. What is the best way to overwinter nukes? There's a question that's popped up a couple different times. And
yeah, I will say that one of the things that's happened is I've only ever lived in warm climate. I will tell you that I tend to use 5-frame nukes because 5-frame nukes, you can actually purchase 5-frame supers to go on those nukes. And I overwinter them the way that I would ordinary colonies. But I would argue that when you're kind of north of Tennessee, maybe, and that's an arbitrary cutoff, but that's me just guessing. When you're above that, it's going to be increasingly difficult to overwinter nukes because, they need to be able to form contiguous clusters. But I did give a talk about nukes one time to some state up north, and I forget because I give so many talks, but people were telling me there that they overwintered 5-frame nukes, no problems, the same way. They just made sure they had a lot of bees and a lot of honey going into winter. And I think in that case, you're going to have a super on those nukes. And like I said, if you use 5-frame nukes, they've got 5-frame medium supers, and it's the same as you would a single colony. So I still think it's a little riskier, but I really can't speak with authority on that because I've only ever lived in warm climates.
yeah.
And incidentally, I was going to say, I see a lot of you sending me private messages or making comments. It's hard for me to answer everybody. So I just want to say thank you for what you're saying about the talk and the podcast. I appreciate you guys listening. It's been a great time for me.
And thank you very much for your time in doing this. Everybody, and I'm going to throw in this because I did have bees in Tennessee, and there is such a cutoff. Up here in I'm in the northwest corner of Ohio, half hour from Indiana, half hour from Michigan. So in the very corner of these 88 counties. When I left my bees, we packed them up. It was 10 degrees below zero. By the time we got to Tennessee, my bees thought summertime had bloomed in. The bloom time starts in Tennessee in the first week of February. So there was drones in the area. I was mating queens in early February, March. So when you have to understand, remember your local resources and what the weather patterns are doing. It's like, and I asked Jamie that question because remember when you're talking and you're hearing somebody, what they're going through is not what you're going to happen. What happens in Northern Ohio is completely different. What's going to happen in Cincinnati or Southern Ohio. What happens for us is not going to affect what happens in Georgia or Texas. So remember to use your area resources, your area mentors, county inspectors, state inspectors, your PhDs, your doctors, the colleges, and use those resources to your advantage, because what they're doing there, I've had people say, well, can you do a split? My dad, and he lives in Kissimmee, he was doing splits in my wintertime. I'm getting ready for wintertime in October, November, and he's making splits. So your beekeeping, your style, and what you're doing in your areas is completely different.
It's funny. I'll make this parting shot and then I'll let you guys have your your meeting. But my swarm season started 2 weeks ago. Our colonies in the back of the lab at the University of Florida started swarming 2 weeks ago. And it's different for everybody. I know that's one of the reasons people's always jealous of Floridians, but it's hot here all the time. And we've had a lot of blooming plants now for about a month, and it's different for everybody. But anyway, I just want to thank you guys all for listening. I know it's Sunday evening. We could go on for days. Jamie, OSBA, thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure. And please let me know if my team and I can ever help you guys in the future. It's always great working with beekeepers. And I wish you all the best of luck and a happy 2021.